You are listening to the Amateur Church podcast, where we pursue excellence in ministry with the right motivation for the sake of love. I'm Pastor Matt, and I'm so thankful that you're on this disciples journey with me. We've been walking through the book of Joshua this week, looking at some great theological truths, devotion questions. We've seen apologetic issues and the need for apologetics in our lives. But also today we are examining evangelism, or how to share the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ based on the book of Joshua. Today there are two major aspects and stories that we see in the book of Joshua that I believe kind of bring evangelism to the forefront. One of them is a very familiar story of this woman named Rahab. So if you will, go to Joshua chapter 2, verse 15 with me, and we see that as the spies come into the promised land, they are met with the encouragement and the protection of Rahab. Look at verse 15, because they are going to share with her just how she and her family would be saved. This foreigner living in a foreign land would become part of the children of Israel through obedience to God's commands. Look at Joshua chapter 2, verse 15. It says, "Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall." Now that's going to be very important in just a moment. "So that she was living on the wall. And she said to them, 'Go to the hill country, so that the pursuers will not happen upon you, and hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterward you may go on your way.' And the men said to her, 'We shall be free from this oath to you which you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land you tie this cord of scarlet thread in the window through which you let us down, and gather to yourself into the house your father and your mother and your brothers and all your father's household. And it shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be free. But anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be free from the oath which you have made us swear.' And she said, 'According to your words, so be it.' So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window." Now we know that is not the end of the story. The spies leave, they go back to the camp, and they share all this information with the Israelites. The Israelites get ready to go into Jericho, and they march around the walls 7 days, and 7 times on the seventh day. And that leads us now to Joshua chapter 6, verse 16. Listen to this. "At the 7th time, when the priests blew the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, 'Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city shall be under the ban. It and all that is in it belongs to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot and all who are with her in the house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent.'" But remember, that wasn't the only instruction. Look at verse 22. "And Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, 'Go into the harlot's house and bring the woman and all she has out there, as you have sworn to her.' So the young men who were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all she had. They also brought out her relatives and placed them outside the camp of Israel. They burned the city with fire and all that was in it. Only the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. However, Rahab the harlot and her father's household and all that she had, Joshua spared, and she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day, for she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho." What we find out is that Rahab and her family was spared. But why? Well, I believe that based on the command of God through these spies to Rahab, 3 elements of her salvation are at hand, just like these are 3 aspects of our very own salvation. Number 1 is that we acknowledge the greatness of God and our personal sin before God. When these spies came to Rahab, Rahab was aware of who they were and aware of the God that they served. In fact, in Joshua chapter 2, she tells in verse 9, "I know the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all inhabitants of the land have melted away before you." And she says, "Because we have heard how God rescued you. She says, and when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God. And so the pledge that is made between her and the spies, and therefore Israel and God, is because based on her acknowledgement of the greatness of God and her falling short of His greatness. The acknowledgement of God's greatness and personal sin is necessary for anyone to trust in Jesus Christ. And so this is a picture for us. An element of our salvation is found, this good news is found in the story of Rahab. Second, she had to accept the grace and the goodness of God in salvation. You see, it's one thing to acknowledge that God is great and we are sinners. It's another thing to receive that goodness of God and grace of God to be saved. When the Israelites told her, tie this scarlet thread to your window and let it hang down, she had to accept salvation. Now, this seems sort of silly to us to even think about this, but if the spies had told her, hey, we're coming and the walls are going to fall down, or we're going to capture you, and she had said, oh, okay, well, I'll just keep doing what I want to do. That seems ridiculous. If you know an army's coming in and you know they're going to win, you know their God's going to give them the victory, then why wouldn't you want to be saved? And yet, there's so many today that know, based on conscience and creation, that there is a God, and know that we are sinners, and know that there is going to be one day death, and yet they still reject God in the hardness of their own heart. We must come to the point where we accept the grace and the goodness of God, and the grace of God is Jesus Christ. So we acknowledge His greatness and our sin. We accept the grace and the goodness of God in the cross of Jesus Christ, but then we abide in the promise of God of salvation. What I mean by this word abide, Jesus would use the word abide in John chapter 15, abide in me and I in you. But the Israelites used this word, at least in the command for her to stay in the house. Now, if you remember, chapter 2, verse 15 says that she let them down by the rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall. Now, let me ask you, where would be the most dangerous place to have your house located if the walls were coming down? Well, on the wall. And while they march around 7 days, and then that seventh day march 7 times, the walls begin to crumble. But do you remember that faith is powerful even when everything around us crumbles? For Rahab, her house was in the wall, and she was told, remain in the wall. Remain in the wall? Even when the walls start coming down? Her faith had to be tested at that moment. Because if she had left, according to the words of the Israelite spies, her blood and her family's blood would not be on their hands. Why? Because she would have left the place of protection. And there are many times that people coming to Christ get so close to the line and yet fall away, yet stop. They are not saved because they do not truly believe Jesus is good enough. That's what the book of Hebrews is about. It's about individuals who get close to the line but never get truly saved because they think Jesus plus the Old Testament, plus sacrifices, plus the law, that's what will save me. There is nothing good that I bring to the table. The only thing I bring to salvation is the sin that I need to be saved from. And there are many, maybe even listening right now, that you think that it's God and you that allows you to be saved. No, God saves you from yourself. So what do? We acknowledge the greatness of God in personal sin. We accept the grace and the goodness of God in Christ, and we abide in the promise that it is faith that saves us. Our faith in Jesus, not works. It is not your work. We trust Christ and obey Him. Now, this is one story that I wanted to spend a lot of our time on today, the story of Rahab. But we see at the very end of the book of Joshua a fulfillment of what they were told in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and that is that as the land was divided, the Levites would take cities of refuge. And in chapter 20, you see in the book of Joshua these cities of refuge given. Remember, they were open to all, and they were within reach, scattered throughout the land. It was a place prepared for life, but the protection only came as they stayed within the boundaries. And the freedom came at the death of the high priest. Jesus is for us that great high priest that died so that we might live. And when he rose from the dead, victorious over death, the grave, and hell, we now rise victorious if we abide in that promise that it is grace by faith in Jesus Christ that saves us, not of works, lest any man should boast. These stories today help us in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ evangelistically to the world around us. We must see God in his holiness, man in his sinfulness, and Jesus Christ as our salvation. As we close out our episode today, this is Throwback Thursday. We look at a moment in church history. And today we see the Council of Chalcedon in 451, AD 451. Chalcedon was a location near Constantinople. And by 451, there was a great question regarding the nature of Christ, the two natures of Christ, his divinity and his humanity. And so at this time, there were many that rose up with differing opinions that led towards heresy. One heresy during that time was the idea that Christ was mono in his nature, one nature, in that his divinity came and overtook his humanity, and now he was just one nature, the divine. Another heresy was that Christ was only human and not divine. That had been dealt with at previous councils. One heresy was that the divine nature and the human nature of Christ came together and created a brand new nature, and so a third nature, a combination of the two. And this, again, is heresy. Christ is two natures in one person. And Pope Leo requested at that time that bishops would gather and settle this issue once and for all. So 400 bishops gathered at the Council of Chalcedon, and they read what became known as Leo's Tome. Some may call it tomb, but it's Tome, Leo's Tome. And in that, he stated Christ's natures in this, and this was part of it. He said, Christ is acknowledged in two natures, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation, the characteristic property of each nature being preserved and coming together to form one person. Christ is one person of the Godhead, two natures, his humanity and his divinity meeting perfectly. Not forming a new nature, but being both in one person. And this has helped us even today in our belief and our understanding of the natures of Jesus Christ, the person of Jesus Christ, and his work of salvation, because he is fully God, fully man. Not 50% either one, but 100% God, 100% man. And because of that, he is our great Redeemer. So the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD is important for us to understand today. It definitely has lasting effects on our Christian faith. This is part of the truth that we now share with the world around us. Remember, evangelism is not complete until the evangelized become the evangelist. So may we take this gospel to the world and make disciples. I love you. I'm praying for you. Stakes in the ground.